The story of Ethan Walker and Clara Hayes did not begin on the island. It began in the air with the sound of a small plane engine struggling against heavy clouds. Ethan remembered the way the wind shook the wings, the way Clara held her seat quietly, trying to look calm even though her eyes betrayed a hidden fear. She was normally confident, always in control at the company headquarters. But thousands of feet above the water, she looked human, worried, tired, and strangely more real than he had ever seen her. When the plane jolted sharply, Ethan's pulse jumped. The pilot shouted something about turbulence, but the words dissolved in the roar of the storm. Rain slapped the windows like hundreds of tiny stones. The cabin lights flickered. Ethan grabbed the armrest. Clara closed her eyes. The smell of wet metal filled the air. No one had time to think before the world tilted to one side. The crash happened in seconds. Ethan only remembered water swallowing him, the cold striking his skin like knives, and the desperate kick upward as he fought to reach the surface. When he finally gasped for air, all he saw was a broken wing floating nearby and pieces of luggage scattered across the waves. His throat burned. His body felt heavy. He searched frantically through the foam until he spotted Clara clinging to a large piece of debris. Shivering but conscious, he swam toward her, using the last of his strength. When he reached her, she whispered his name with a shaky breath that barely escaped her lips. The current pushed them toward a distant shapeless strip of sand, maybe an island. Ethan kicked and paddled, pulling the debris along with Clara holding onto it. The journey felt endless, but the pull of survival kept them moving until the ocean finally delivered them to the shore. Ethan collapsed on the wet sand, gasping hard. The sky was still dark from the storm, but the rain had softened into a thin mist. For a while, he simply lay there, too exhausted to lift his head. Then he heard Clara trying to sit up. Even in that moment-drenched, shaking, and covered in sand, she looked surprisingly composed. Her voice cracked when she said, "You're awake." But her eyes were warm, almost relieved in a way Ethan had never seen before. He forced himself to sit up and look around. The island was small but covered in green trees. No houses, no boats, no signs of people anywhere. The ocean stretched endlessly behind them. The beach was empty. The silence was too large. Clara hugged her arms around herself as the wind brushed past. "I don't think anyone else made it," she said quietly. Ethan heard the guilt in her voice, even though the crash wasn't her fault. He wanted to comfort her, but his mind was racing. They needed shelter, water, and a plan. They found a sturdy fallen tree near the edge of the forest. Using palm leaves and driftwood, Ethan managed to build a rough shelter. Clara helped him gather coconuts and dry branches, moving with a kind of determination that showed she refused to fall apart. She was strong, but Ethan noticed subtle tremors in her hands when she thought he wasn't looking. By the time the sun began to set, their small shelter was ready. The sky above them glowed orange and gold, the colors reflecting off the calm waves. For a moment, the island looked almost peaceful, as if hiding the truth that they were completely alone. Clara sat beside Ethan, her face tired but thoughtful. She stared at the horizon without speaking. He thought she might be lost in memories of home or wondering what the rescue teams were doing at that moment. But when she finally spoke, her voice was softer than the wind. "Ethan, what if no one finds us?" The question hit him like a weight. Not because he feared the island, he feared what she was feeling. Clara was a woman who always carried the pressure of an entire company. Hearing her uncertainty made something inside him shift. He didn't know what to answer. He could only look at her and see the quiet worry in her eyes. She wasn't asking about survival. She was asking about something deeper, something she didn't dare explain yet. That night, as waves whispered across the sand and the fire flickered weakly, Ethan felt something new in the silence between them. It wasn't fear. It wasn't danger. It was the beginning of a connection that neither of them had expected. The morning on the island was quiet but full of tension. Ethan woke to the sound of waves crashing against the shore and the soft rustle of palm leaves. Clara was already awake, staring at the horizon, her face still marked by exhaustion from the storm. For the first time, Ethan noticed the small signs of fear in her. How she hugged herself slightly. How her eyes scanned the empty ocean. They had survived the night, but neither of them could ignore the uncertainty that hung over them. The island felt smaller than before, crowded by the unspoken feelings that now lingered between them. They quickly got to work. Food was the first priority. Ethan and Clara gathered coconuts and tried fishing near a small stream. It wasn't easy, but they laughed at their repeated failures, breaking the tension in small, fleeting moments. Each laugh, each shared glance, drew them closer. Ethan noticed how Clara's hair fell loosely over her face, how her eyes sparkled when she smiled, and he realized he had never seen her so human. The confident, untouchable boss he knew disappeared on this island, replaced by someone fragile, real, and achingly close. By midday, the heat forced them to rest. They sat near the fire they had managed to keep alive, and a silence fell between them that was heavier than words. Ethan watched her without thinking. Clara's expression was soft, almost contemplative, and she reached for a coconut, breaking the quiet. "We might be here for a while," she said quietly, almost to herself. Her voice trembled slightly, and Ethan felt a strange pull, a need to comfort her that he hadn't anticipated. He offered her some water, and their hands brushed. The touch was brief, but it made his chest tighten. Clara didn't pull away, and neither did he. As the afternoon dragged on, the closeness between them became more noticeable. Every small movement, handing each other tools, brushing sand off one another. Adjusting the makeshift shelter was charged with something unspoken. Clara laughed when Ethan slipped trying to climb a rock. She scolded him jokingly when he got coconut juice all over his shirt. These small interactions felt electric, different from any office banter. Ethan realized he was seeing her in a completely new light. The barrier of boss and employee had vanished, replaced by two people who relied on each other for survival. And somehow, then came the rainstorm. It started suddenly, drenching the island in minutes. They ran to the shelter they had built, cramped and small, barely enough for two people to sit side by side. Ethan tried to keep the fire going while Clara secured their few supplies. The shelter was hot, humid, and smelled of wet wood and earth, yet it felt intimate. The storm raged outside, and the sound of rain against the shelter walls made their hearts beat faster. In the dim light, their proximity was impossible to ignore. Clara finally broke the silence. "Ethan, I don't know how much longer I can do this," she said softly. Her eyes met his, and for the first time she seemed vulnerable, almost fragile. Ethan felt a lump in his throat. He wanted to say something comforting, something that would make her feel safe, but words failed him. He reached out instinctively and took her hand. She didn't resist. Instead, she held it, and Ethan felt her tremble slightly. There was a pause, long and heavy, where the storm outside was loud. But the only thing that mattered was the connection they shared in that tiny shelter. Clara's voice was barely a whisper. "Please, don't leave me alone tonight." The words were simple but loaded with emotion, a mix of fear, longing, and trust that Ethan had never seen from her before. He squeezed her hand gently. There was nothing romantic spoken yet, but the air between them had changed. Survival was no longer just about finding food or water. It was about being there for each other, about sharing a bond forged in the vulnerability of their situation. Ethan realized that this closeness was new territory, a delicate line between friendship, trust, and something far deeper. Clara leaned slightly toward him, and he noticed how natural it felt, how little thought it took to just be near her. The storm outside mirrored the emotions inside the chaos. The tension, the heat, but inside that shelter, there was a strange comfort. As the rain continued, Ethan and Clara sat silently, hands still touching, hearts quietly racing. Words were unnecessary. The moment spoke louder than anything they could say. He understood in a way that scared him that their feelings had shifted. The island, with all its danger and isolation, had stripped away their roles, their titles, their professional facades, leaving only two people who needed each other. And in that shared need, a new connection began to grow, one that neither of them could ignore. By the time the storm passed, The sun peeked through clouds, painting the shelter in soft light. Clara finally let go of his hand reluctantly, and Ethan noticed a small sigh of relief or disappointment. She gave. The island was quiet again, but neither of them could forget the moment that had passed. A turning point in their relationship. Survival was still uncertain. But something else had been born in that shelter: trust, closeness, and a quiet longing that neither Ethan nor Clara could yet name. The day continued with tasks, but the air between them was different. Every glance, every touch, every shared laugh carried new weight. They were no longer just two people stranded together. They were two hearts cautiously navigating something fragile, beautiful, and terrifying. Night fell over the island, heavier than the day. The sky darkened, and the fire they had built flickered weakly in the growing cold. Ethan and Clara sat close to it, trying to keep warm, but it was more than just the chill that pressed them together. The events of the day, the rainstorm, the laughter, the small touches had left them on edge, hearts beating faster than usual. Every sound of the waves hitting the shore seemed louder, sharper, more intimate in the quiet of night. The island felt both vast and impossibly small, a world that contained only the two of them and their unspoken emotions. Clara leaned against a piece of driftwood, trying to steady her breathing. "Do you think anyone is looking for us?" she asked quietly. Her voice sounded fragile, almost childlike, and Ethan's chest tightened. He had never heard her sound uncertain like this. "I hope so," he replied, trying to sound confident even though he shared her fear. "We have to hope." She nodded, but her gaze drifted toward the dark horizon, and he could see the worry in her eyes. There was something in the way she looked at him, something beyond simple survival, a silent plea that he couldn't ignore. The hours passed slowly, filled with small actions that carried more weight than words. Ethan adjusted the firewood while Clara checked their supplies. Each movement brought them closer, and every accidental brush of their hands or shoulders sent an unspoken message. She laughed softly when he stumbled over a stone, and he caught her gaze in return, feeling a spark that neither of them wanted to name. For the first time, the distance created by their professional lives seemed irrelevant. On this island, there were no titles, no hierarchy, only two people trying to survive on learning to notice the quiet beauty in each other as the fire's glow flickered across their faces. Clara finally spoke in a softer, more vulnerable voice. "Ethan, I never realized how much I rely on you until now," she said. Her eyes searched his, looking for reassurance, understanding, and perhaps something more. Ethan felt his heart pound. He wanted to say everything, but the right words refused to come. Instead, he simply nodded, letting the silence fill the space between them. The storm outside had passed, but inside him, a new storm was forming, one of emotions he couldn't ignore. Clara shifted slightly closer, the warmth of her presence almost overwhelming. I don't want to be alone here," she admitted. Her voice was barely a whisper, but the weight of it made Ethan flinch. The honesty in her words, the vulnerability, was something he had never seen from her in the office. She was strong, confident, unshakably, except now, on this island, she was real. And he realized that he wanted to be the one to stand by her no matter what. "I won't leave," he said firmly, trying to steady his own shaking voice. "You won't be alone tonight. I promise." The words were simple, but they carried all the weight he could give. Clara's eyes softened, and for a moment she seemed to relax, leaning slightly against him. It was a small act, but it meant more than words could ever express. Ethan felt the pull of her closeness, the warmth of her shoulder, and the truth of what was growing between them. It was no longer just about survival, it was about connection, about trust, and about feelings neither of them could ignore. Hours slipped by in quiet companionship. The fire crackled, the waves crashed, and the world outside their little circles seemed distant and irrelevant. Every glance, every small touch, every shared breath carried a tension that was electric yet tender. They didn't speak much because words seemed unnecessary. Their closeness spoke louder than sentences could. Ethan realized that he had never felt this way about anyone, and Clara, well, she had never allowed anyone this close. The island had changed everything. later as the fire died down. They sat side by side, shoulders touching, and neither moved to break the contact. The stars above reflected in their eyes, and Ethan felt a quiet understanding between them. Clara turned slightly, her voice soft and almost afraid to speak. "If no one comes, if we stay here longer, would you stay with me?" The question hung in the air, heavy with longing, uncertainty, and hope. Ethan's heart skipped. It was no longer a hypothetical question, it was a moment of truth. A test of what their bond had become. He reached for her hand again, holding it gently. The touch was steady, reassuring, and full of emotion. "Yes," he whispered. "I would stay. I'm not going anywhere." Clara exhaled slowly, a mix of relief and emotion passing through her. She leaned closer, resting her head slightly near him. And for the first time, the island didn't feel like a place of fear. It was a place of connection, of beginnings, and of emotions that neither could deny. The night stretched on. But the cold, the isolation, and the fear all seemed smaller now. They had each other, and that was enough for now. Every moment on the island had brought them closer, stripping away barriers and revealing something raw, beautiful, and real. The stars above seemed to shine just for them, silent witnesses to a bond that had begun in the midst of uncertainty, but would linger long after they returned to the world outside. Dawn broke over the island with a golden light that cut through the remnants of night. Ethan woke first, listening to the familiar sound of waves and the distant calls of seabirds. Clara was still asleep, her face relaxed for the first time since the crash. Watching her, he realized how much the island had changed them, how much they had changed each other. The bond they had formed in fear and uncertainty was deeper than either had expected. He tried to hold back the surge of emotion, knowing the day ahead would bring both relief and new challenges. Suddenly, a distant rumble reached them. Ethan squinted toward the horizon and felt a rush of hope. "Clara," he said softly, shaking her shoulder. Her eyes fluttered open, groggy but alert. He pointed toward the sky. "A helicopter." She sat up immediately, her fear giving way to hope, but there was something else in her eyes: hesitation. Almost like she was afraid the rescue would change everything. Ethan could feel her tension. He realized this was the moment that would test what had grown between them. The helicopter's roar grew louder, and soon it hovered above the island. The sound was a mix of salvation and finality. As rescuers lowered ropes and shouted instructions, Clara and Ethan gathered their few belongings. The adrenaline of survival was fading, replaced by the rush of leaving the island and returning to the world they had left behind. Ethan noticed Clara's hands trembled slightly, gripping his arm as if she didn't want to let go of the closeness they had shared in the night. He understood he felt the same. On the helicopter, the reality hit them. Back on the mainland, the world moved fast. People, lights, cameras, and voices surrounded them, but Clara's focus never wavered. She stayed close to Ethan, ignoring reporters and flashing cameras. For her, nothing else mattered except the moment between them. She had survived a plane crash, a deserted island, and storms. But it was the emotional vulnerability on that island that had affected her the most. And now, with the noise of civilization crashing back, she needed clarity, needed honesty, needed the truth of what Ethan felt. When they finally stepped onto solid ground, Clara stopped. She turned to Ethan, her voice soft but serious. "Before we go back, before everything becomes normal again, I need to know something." Ethan's heart raced, his mind recalling the night on the island, the quiet, the closeness, the confession she had made under the storm. He nodded, waiting, holding his breath for the words she would say on that island. She whispered, "When I asked if you would stay with me, what was your answer?" Her voice trembled slightly, not from fear of the outside world, but from the weight of what she was asking. It was a question that carried months of unspoken feelings, nights of tension, and days of quiet longing. Ethan felt the gravity of it, realizing this moment could change everything between them forever. He stepped closer, his eyes locking with hers. "My answer," he said slowly, deliberately, "is the same now as it was then." Clara's breath caught. Her heart seemed to leap in her chest. "I would stay," he whispered, letting each word sink into the quiet around them. "Not because we were stranded, not because the island forced us together, but because being with you means something real. Something I don't want to lose." Tears welled up in Clara's eyes, and she exhaled a shaky, emotional breath. It was the same mix of relief, joy, and vulnerability she had shown on the island, only stronger now that they were back in the real world. Slowly, almost tentatively, she reached for his hand. Ethan took it, feeling the warmth and the truth of her touch. No words were needed. Everything they had shared on the island, the laughter, the fear, the quiet nights by the fire had brought them to this point, and the bond had only grown stronger as the crowd and chaos of the rescue faded into the background. Ethan and Clara stood together, hand in hand, facing the future. Titles, offices, responsibilities, all of that seemed distant now. What mattered was them, the connection that had formed under the most extreme circumstances, and the choice they had made to stay close despite fear, uncertainty, and the pull of the world around them.